Roger, Navy Heavy, runway 26, clear for takeoff.
Clear takeoff, runway 26, Heavy, good. You know, you have it.
Welcome to the Aeropedia Podcast. I'm Ashwin.
And I'm Peter.
And before we get into this week's intro and this week's fun episode, Peter and I just wanted to say thanks to all our listeners and all our supporters. As you all know, we started the Aeropedia Podcast earlier in 2024. And although we had a good idea about the first few episodes, we never imagined such an awesome rate of growth for the podcast. So the listeners and the episodes have been so much fun, and we just are as passionate as we were earlier in the year to continue to educate and inspire the broader community. And we hope that you'll join us for the ride in 2025 as well. So lots of fun stuff coming up in 2025. But enough about that. Peter, who are we talking to today?
Thanks, Ashwin, and thanks all of you for listening in, as Ashwin was saying. Well, for this first of 2025 episode, we're actually going to do a bit of a year in review for 2024, and we have a couple of repeat visitors that you'll recognize. Courtney Miller and Brian Rynott are both joining us for this episode to talk about 2024 and then give us a few predictions they have for 2025. Listen in for my prediction. Here we go.
Courtney and Brian, welcome to this special edition of the Aeropedia Podcast, and we're hoping that we can take a look at 2024 and all the major events that happened in the year. And we were wondering, which two industry experts we would call on, and now we have, our answer in front of us. So thanks for being on the podcast once again.
So to be clear, the question you asked was which two industry experts would return your email, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Got it.
And I just want to know where on your list, like how far down I was.
18th and 15th.
And then right, yeah. Thank you. And then how far down Courtney was.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't even think he was on the list, actually. We just had to go past
even
Pity podcast. Better. I'm here for it.
Even better. No, it's great.
We got to the end of the list,
guys.
and then we went to the trivia lineup. Mm-hmm. And then we had to go down from the top from that list to what we found.
L1011.
Yeah.
Courtney.
By the way, do you know how many times the L1011 has been just mentioned? I think it's at least 10 to 12 episodes in the year. So Courtney, thanks for that.
Why? How's it mentioned? Like people are laughing at me?
Both. They're like, I hope I don't get an L1011 question like Courtney did. Ha ha ha. Right?
Guess what? I won't forget ever again.
Yeah.
That's
I think Lockheed Courtney, is very happy to hear that.
I do think you need an L1011 model behind you, Courtney.
Yeah,
just as a reminder for that.
Mm-hmm. When I was in grade school, I put together a model for 4H, which was a TWA L1011. So one exists somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So before folks start to completely zone out and say this episode is not for me, let me just bring them back on track and say this is not just about four guys having a beer and talking nonsense. We're going to talk about aviation and 2024 in particular, and coming up is stuff like the Alaska and Hawaiian transaction, what happened with JetBlue and Spirit, things like what's happened with Boeing throughout the year. We'll talk about the Airbus A321XLR as well. So lots of fun stuff coming up. And in the end, as a special trivia round, we're all going to ask each other some fun trivia questions. So AvGeeks asking AvGeeks trivia is just something you have to tune into the whole episode for. So let's get started. And I think the first thing on the agenda we wanted to chat about was the Alaska and Hawaiian transaction, and everything's done now. So Courtney, maybe you can start. Tell us about what impact this has on the market and what do you see moving forward?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about Alaska Hawaiian this year was that it was a merger that actually closed. I mean, it kind of, I don't want to say kind of took a second seat in terms of just news coverage, but it was kind of run of the mill. I remember was it the DOT or the DOJ? We were kind of waiting to the last minute before they could file any any pushback, and they're like, oh, we need like an extension for like 12 hours or whatever it was, and then it just passed. We're like, okay. And so it's just kind of the merger that happened. It's a merger, especially in the context of the one that didn't happen. It just kind of made sense. I mean, for those who pay attention to any of the work that I've done in the past, Brett Snyder and I published a report in 2019 saying Alaska and Hawaiian should merge. And so it took a while in a pandemic, but we felt great when it actually happened. And actually, a lot of those things that we had talked about are starting to happen, including using the wide bodies to do some international stuff. So great to see it finally kind of commenced. The two airlines together. Alaska's actually very experienced. They have a very good track record with merging airlines, and it appears that is moving forward already. It finally, the people who called us crazy in 2019, which again could also be true, that when we called for this merger back then, again, different world. But the people who called us crazy then are suddenly like, oh yeah, this is a no-brainer, and look at all the low-hanging fruit that Alaska can harvest, and they, by the way, are right on both ends probably.
So just to be clear, Courtney, you're taking credit for the merger. We should see visual approach, and Frankie Flyer noted in the SEC filing.
Yeah,
in the proxy
on the logo will be on the tail.
Yeah, good.
They couldn't decide between Pualani and
in the visual approach,
the Eskimo
or Chester, I think his name
Chester.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think just to add to what Courtney said, I think Alaska had their investor day in New York last week when we're recording this, and Ben and the senior management team at Alaska, I think they did a great job presenting a really coherent strategy, identifying a lot of benefits and synergies of the combined airline. Courtney talked about the wide bodies in Seattle. They're going to move some of the A330s to do long haul out of Seattle to Tokyo and Seoul, but they're also going to do stuff from Seattle to Anchorage in the summer season. And just what you can do with that combined network, that combined fleet, and grow the scale over time. It gives them tremendous, I think, market presence and force on the West Coast and in the markets, and really makes them very competitive. And I think even adds an additional layer of competitiveness to oneworld in the North American market. Hawaiian equally is great management team, great brand, and I think Alaska was very cognizant and respectful in that, and part of that acquisition process and in maintaining that. So it'd be really interesting to see what Ben and the team do. I think there was a slide in the investor day which showed Alaska's ASMs, like the percentage of their ASMs over time, and it was I forget the exact amount, but it was something like 60-70% were going Seattle east. Right. And when you layer in Hawaiian, it ends up being more like 40% east, 40% west, and then the rest up and down the West Coast. So from a network diversification perspective, it also helps build on that quite a bit. And look, they've got a really, really good team at Alaska, and very smart. And I think they've been very focused and thoughtful about what they're going to do. I think the timing from the DOJ and DOT in terms of that coming across, it happened very fast. As Courtney said, there were a lot of people waiting for that. And it definitely probably wasn't a given the JetBlue and Spirit, but they got it done.
Personally, I wasn't ever really nervous that it wouldn't pass, but maybe I was naive. How much do you think the rhetoric and the fear that it wouldn't go through because of the JetBlue Spirit not going through, how much of that was a ghosting or effect or a halo effect, of that? There was just so many fundamental differences between the mergers, right? Network overlap and that. I just never thought that Alaska Hawaiian was in jeopardy ever. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's talk about the one major difference between the Spirit JetBlue merger and the Alaska Hawaiian merger that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's just the judge, or lack of one, or DOJ on the Alaska Hawaiian side. This was the great unknown, and I don't guess you could call it a halo effect. It was just more risk, right? The Spirit JetBlue merger, which, by the way, the industry had fundamentally changed during the period while it was still being challenged. But the finding, the response of the judge, the actual paper, for lack of actual vocabulary, late on a Friday, that he wrote, and that ended kind of with, this one's for you, Spirit customers. People were like, oh, so we can get a nut job, as like we have to bake that into our probability for mergers and this and that. I think that, call it the halo effect, definitely hung over Alaska Hawaiian until that deadline passed. And I think it was so anticlimactic. I mean, it was like, oh, what's going to happen? Like, we were counting the hours, and then like, did nothing. It's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, look, under the current administration, just generally, I don't think M&A was necessarily favored. And so there was always that broader overhang. I mean, to your point, Peter, it was different competitive market, different region, the overlap or lack thereof was a lot different. So, whether or not it's a given or not, I can't speak to that, but I think that just from a sentiment perspective, there were questions about whether it would proceed. I also think that just from a broader industry perspective and timing, the DOJ became more focused on antitrust issues with Google right around that time as well, and so that might have played into some of the overlapping element between Alaska and Hawaiian.
So as a result of the merger now and the really focused effort on Seattle, how much should Delta be worried?
Worried? I mean, look, Delta is not to Alaska what Alaska is to Delta. Like, those two things don't work. Can you tell I'm helping my daughter prepare for her SATs? Delta's not worried. Seattle has not been profitable for Delta. There's very little sign that this isn't going to make that suddenly profitable for Delta. The interesting players in this whole this merger aren't Alaska's competitors, in my opinion. It's Alaska's partners. If you remember, Alaska partners with everybody, right? And in large part because everybody were like, oh, they're a narrow body operator. I mean, why not? Like, I'll take the feed into the US and be their long haul provider. And then they're like, joink, we've got 787s and A330s. And we're going to fly them to Tokyo, and where was the other one? Seoul. Right? So American basically started long haul operations because of Alaska's addition to One World. Now, granted, a lot of that was for American's ability to get to Bangalore, which requires there's this technicality where it requires you to fly over this really small country called Russia, and that became a problem there. So they never really able to do it. But it's the partners of Alaska that seem to be more of an interesting story in terms of, were they surprised? How do they feel about this transition? No fallout, no complaints or anything yet. But I think more from a competitive aspect, that seems a little more interesting than Delta. It's not. I mean, it's rounding error for Delta, and it's important to Delta, but it's rounding error.
So in the investor day and that, there are a lot of discussions, right, around the Hawaiian fleet and the Alaska Airlines fleet. Not a lot of discussion of the other Alaska Air Group airline, which is Horizon, and how that's going to be leveraged, and if it'll grow. They've been flying some Alaska routes now out of Anchorage and Fairbanks and that. What do you guys think about Horizon as a Air Group member?
Yeah,
Brian, you
I
go
think,
ahead.
yeah, I'll start. And Courtney, obviously, you know the regional space even better than me, and those guys especially. But look, I think it's a key partner for them. I'm not sure that there's a lot in Investor Day to tell in terms of Horizon specifically at this point. I think the vision of this Investor Day was to lay the framework of Hawaiian and how Hawaiian is going to fit into the broader Alaska strategy, and along with that, things like going to more of a premium cabin concept. They're going to do a premium credit card, right? They're focused on cargo and optimizing cargo and increasing cargo. Indeed, as part of the Hawaiian acquisition, they're going to be taking over the Amazon agreement to operate A330-300 freighter aircraft for them. The thing about Horizon is that they've positioned themselves as a Embraer 175 operator, right? They've exited the Q400 market. They've expanded into the state of Alaska, as you say, taking over some of the routes for Alaska there, or supplementing service. And I think that, they've done a really good job at that, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily a growth story as much as it is, to ensure that Alaska has a robust network on the West Coast and in the state of Alaska. Courtney, I don't know if you have much to add there.
Look, you didn't hear about the Horizon, not because they don't matter or not because they're not killing it, because it's nothing changes for Horizon. They continue to do what they do. They don't touch Hawaii. You could feed more connecting passengers across the Horizon network, but Brian's absolutely right. Look, they're doing what they do. The 175 has turned out to be a good airplane for the state of Alaska. And look, when you're in the upper left corner of the country, having a relatively long range small aircraft has just worked incredibly well for Alaska. For a lot of airlines, but specifically for Alaska. So I think the story with Horizon is there's no story. They just keep doing what they're doing. They'll just fine.
Yeah. Switching gears to the JetBlue and Spirit non-merger, right? And I think we've kind of already discussed why it didn't happen. But I think I want to focus a little bit on what's next for these airlines individually, right? What do you think JetBlue needs to do next? And same question for Spirit, although it seems like there's industry consensus that Spirit and Frontier are next to get in line here, right? And just get their businesses together in order to simply just add to the market and survive, right? So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Look, I think on JetBlue, what you've seen there with the management team has been exactly as it should be. I think that they've done a great job, and really, hat tip to Marty, their president, coming back. I think that was a major strategic win for JetBlue to bring him back into the business, bringing over Daniel Schurz, who's an incredible network guy, and really reforming the network around where they have scale and where their brand really carries a premium weight to it. So Boston and New York, and not exclusive to those cities, right? I think I heard an interview that Marty gave recently, and he was talking about their expansion out of Iceland and how they've grown substantially in terms of loyalty, sign up, and way above their expected share relative to their market presence. They positioned their flying, to really position themselves around operating in the Northeast. They've pushed out deliveries on some of their forward order aircraft from Airbus, and are really focused on the core, which is operating a reliable airline with the products people want. And I think you've seen that more recently. They just announced they're going to introduce the equivalent of a domestic first class product. Some of the media has called it mini mint. I know that they've said that it won't be called that, but they're definitely following this premium trend in a lot of ways, mirroring what Alaska has successfully done out of Seattle that we just spoke about. So I think they're making very strategic moves, tactical moves, and really adding the capacity where it's going to help them the most.
I think they missed a branding opportunity. Instead of Mini Mint, they could have branded with Tic Tac. And it could have been
you beat me
Tic
to
Tac.
it, Peter. That's it. It's great. I mean, that's for the taking, right? There you go, Marty. We'll make sure he listens to this podcast, and we walk away with
blue
Tic Tac glass,
right? They hand them out, blue Tic Tacs. It would have been a great branding partnership.
That's funny.
That's funny.
So look, I think looking at the future of the two airlines, I think requires looking at where they were leading into the merger talks. Remember, JetBlue didn't start the merger talks. Frontier did. I'm fairly certain. And then JetBlue's like, no, we want it. And Frontier said, no, you don't. We want it. And Spirit said, no, JetBlue, you don't want this. Frontier wants it. And JetBlue's like, well, we'll pay more. And Frontier's like, fine. Okay, fine. We'll pay a little bit more. And JetBlue's like, no, we're going to pay a lot more. And Spirit, to Ted Christie's defense, in his defense, he said, look, I don't think this is going to pass muster with the DOJ. And at some point, and this is probably the fifth time I've said this today, there's a price for everything. And we know what the price for Spirit going with JetBlue was. Now, the idea at the time, and this was across the industry, the comment on JetBlue going after Spirit was, well, if they don't do this, they're stuck. What else are they going to do? Now, at the time, we were like, well, I mean, you could run an airline. Like, there's an operation that could be improved and this and that. Look, nobody actually listens to what I say at the time. So it's thoroughly enjoyable for me to go back and cherry pick the times when I was right and conveniently forget about the times when I wasn't. But for JetBlue, that's exactly what they've done after the rejection. And they've never said this, but if you listen closely, you can hear the sigh of relief when that merger failed. Now, so JetBlue, and by the way, they, now Joanna's in. I think bringing in Marty, Brian already said this. Marty's. I'm a huge Marty fan. I'm also a huge Daniel Schurz fan. Those two are now the dynamic duo to watch in this industry. They're just some of the most capable, for completely different and complementary reasons. So they're just doing the smart, not necessarily sexy thing, which is, look, Islip back into Boston. I think Islip is genius. There are a lot of people on Long Island who would like to remain loyal or be loyal to JetBlue. Spirit, on the other hand, I mean, look, again, in Ted Christie's defense, I'm sure he stood in front of his board and been like, I told you so. Like, I literally told you so. And now he still has the mess to deal with. Spirit's future is probably not as Spirit. The over-under is still very heavily with Frontier. I know Frontier keeps saying, no, we don't want to, but I think they've officially bid through the bankruptcy process. But the over-under, and I've made this prediction actually on our podcast, which I probably won't get to till after this publishes. Again, I have to throw out Brett Snyder because it was with a conversation with him. where we just really like the idea. If there's one airline that could find so much value in South Florida operations, believe it or not, it's United Airlines. Not saying they're going to buy Spirit, but I'm saying they got to be looking really close at whatever may or may not shake out with Spirit, because a Fort Lauderdale Latin American hub, there is no airline that would be more valuable, that would be more valuable to than United Airlines. And they have to be looking at those gates with customs and everything in that new terminal, licking their chops, looking for an opportunity. That's kind of the contrarian take.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what Courtney said. I think maybe early preview of our Airline Geek trivia, Ashwin and Peter, but back, and I'll date myself, back in the late 90s when I was an undergraduate university, United actually used to have a hub or mini hub in Miami at the time, down to Latin America. And then they would have 727, 737s that served a variety of cities. I think New Orleans, Atlanta, Newark, amongst others that would go to, non-hub destinations. But it was primarily really focused on feeding the long haul into Latin America for them.
And then they completely left Miami for a while, didn't they? If I remember correctly.
They did.
They did. Yeah. They've gone.
And that was right before the merger, I think.
Yeah,
well, U.S. wasn't the only busy region for acquisitions and that. So maybe switching gears a little bit now to our European audience, Lufthansa and ITA, that got success and approved. Want to get your take, but what's interesting to me is, Lufthansa used to have an Italian branch that they started up to try to get traffic there, and then they have Air Dolomiti that they've had for a long time, which is an Italian carrier. How does this differ? How does this help them, and how is it going to be different than when they had Lufthansa Italia?
Yeah, so I was thinking when I first saw this question, Peter, that we need to phone a friend and get Brett Snyder in on this, because he's if there's one thing he loves, it's to poke around at Alitalia / ITA. I think for Lufthansa at a high level, these guys have the playbook, right? They know how to do this, how to do airline M&A, how to incorporate other airlines. They've got this, multi-hub, multi-brand strategy, and they've deployed it really well with Austrian, Brussels, Swiss, and other carriers. I think for them, probably the pivot this time, Lufthansa Italia, when they had that operation Air Dolomiti, that's all focused on northern Italy. With ITA / Alitalia, you're getting Rome, right? And that's a key hub for them. And Lufthansa will bring, I think, a level of scale and focus to the airline, as well as offering connecting opportunities, more premium traffic. If you look at the Italian market, and either domestically within Italy or Italy to EU, that market is really controlled or dominated by Ryanair and EasyJet, and ITA Alitalia is a much smaller player. So being able to have that Lufthansa connection, I think strategically it's very important for them.
Yeah, I get the sense, and I know absolutely nothing about how this merger was eventually consummated, but I get the sense that Lufthansa was the obvious player, right? And they knew it, and everybody else knew it, and so they were just like, we will sit here until you are desperate enough to give us the airline. And eventually, that's probably what happened. So really, how are we defining success here? I think this is going to be a success for Lufthansa because, like Brian said, they know exactly what they're doing. ITA's, there's a lot of legacy with Alitalia and ITA, and a lot of challenges that come with that. And I think Lufthansa, they were the only buyer. Like they were the only buyer left that really could have done that. And I'm sure that this will work out for them. I'm sure they have their own headaches with it, but that's kind of what stands out to me in terms of that merger.
Yeah, I remember Peter had this slide up. It was probably one of the trivia questions in a previous podcast, and the entire slide was filled with the Lufthansa group. Like there's that many actual entities,
Sure.
right? And it just keeps growing. So it really feels like Europe heading towards this, three large groups controlling majority of the traffic and the two or three low cost carriers, right? That's just the trend. It seems like there's no smaller player that can survive for too long. It's just going to get eaten up by one of these 5 or 6 big players.
Which, in fairness, so if you compare the EU, and sorry UK, but I'll lump you in with this, you have an economy that's similar to the United States. You have a geography, just the overall size. I think it's a little bit higher population, but you have similar markets. The big difference is every state in the United States doesn't require its own flag on the side of an airplane, right? So you have the flag carriers of the EU. And so I don't see this necessarily as kind of gobbling up. I do see it as rationalization of Europe, right? The ability for Europe to kind of consolidate into 3 big players, quite frankly. Just like we have the United States, and you have your low-cost providers, and we know that's sustainable. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a pattern that needs to be followed and they flow through. I think what we're seeing is 2 different. I mean, look, the alternative is the merry-go-round of bankruptcies that we had in the U.S. Not exactly recommended. So 2 different paths to kind of get to what looks like the sustainable lowercase s airline model. In major markets.
Certainly is depressing from an AvGeek perspective, though, because you're not going to see each individual country's airline at a certain airport. So the future of AvGeekness is going to get boring.
Pretty bearish on AvGeekery when it comes to aircraft types and flags. Yeah.
Yeah, and finally transitioning to the Korean and Asiana merger, which happened just a few weeks ago, I believe, right? It's been kind of, there's been a lot of flirting going on for the last 3-4 years, I guess, but now it's finally done. Yeah, and I didn't even realize it was done until we brought it up here. So yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how does that Asia Pacific market change here after this merger?
The slowest merger may be on record, right? 4 years in the making. 2018 when it was announced, or
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think there were a lot of competitive issues that had to be addressed as part of this, particularly with the U.S. and EU.
We'll wait to see. We'll wait to see what the Frontier Spirit merger does. That may, from absolute original start to what may, I'll bet it's going to be around that.
Yeah. I think with Korean and Asiana, what you had there is it just took time, 1, from the regulator perspective, and 2, for them to be able to transfer these route authorities to various airlines, right? So Asiana's cargo division, which in its own right is big, was sold to Air Incheon. Korean divested some routes to T-Way. So it's not a quick process to address that and to be able to transfer that. But ultimately, what you now have is going to be a single airline that really has scale. I think they're going to be the 10th largest airline by fleet size in the world. And, hopefully bringing them together is one much larger carrier, adds the financial strength, heft, and depth for them and their partners in the region. Korea is a very easy, Seoul is a very easy transit point, particularly what Korean Air has done to build out that hub. Asiana, from a standalone perspective, leading up to this, they had been struggling. I think the Korean Development Bank had put in some money and done some restructuring before. So really having a single airline consolidated at that flag carrier level, it really creates a kind of a national champion for them to compete globally. They're going to get the synergies. As a result of that, they're going to have still a very large cargo airline and presence, and at the same time, supporting competition. That it's not just going to be, controlled by Korean Air, but they've been able to address the various concerns.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about just kind of the Korean market and the combination of these two airlines is Korea and Seoul's quest to answer the question: are they a two airline hub or a one airline hub? Right? Are they Tokyo or are they Singapore? Even kind of Hong Kong in that perspective, and I think the difference there is Japan's very large domestic just feed and network. But I think obviously we have the answer for Seoul, and I don't think it's a bad answer. I think it's like Brian said. Would you say the 10th largest airline by fleet size now? Right. So you have the heft, and look, it's one fewer competitor. We can definitely call this consolidation, rationalization, whichever your flavor. And I don't see any reason why this won't be looked on over time after whatever challenges are forgotten as a success.
So switching gears to OEMs, and there has been one OEM in 2024 that has pretty much constantly been in the news, right? It feels like every few weeks there was something either negative or positive, but mostly negative, happening with them. So Boeing went through so much this year, right? They had the Spirit Aerosystems deal. They had the new CEO coming in. They had the labor strike, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just go through and unpack a bit of that and just understand what effect that's had on the ecosystem and what's next for them.
Yeah, so let's look back 12 months ago where we were, and we were saying all the same things about Boeing, and that was before the list of we even get to the list of challenges. Like, we don't go through the prior challenges because this year was so challenging. I think the one challenge with Boeing that I wouldn't say we all missed. I certainly missed, but should have been a little bit more aware to us was the strike. Right? We knew that this negotiation was coming. We knew that Boeing was in a very poor. They had very, very little leverage in the grand scheme of things in the context for negotiations, and it hit hard, and it wasn't like tossing a door out over Portland, was it? In that I was going to say, well, it could have been Washington, but I think it was Oregon actually where and so look, I mean, things aren't great at Boeing, but now far be it from me. I always have to caveat this. I'm no Boeing apologist, so don't worry about that. But it's so overcovered. It's so overdone even. Boeing's terrible and everybody has their own, blame Douglas and do this and do that, and if I were in charge, right? Look, they've got challenges. They have deeper challenges after this year, but let's face it, they are too big to fail. And God help us if I'm wrong in saying that, because then we've got some serious problems. The Spirit. Look, everybody wants to buy a company named Spirit, apparently, but there are challenges there, quality challenges. Again, in the context of coming out of COVID, I don't think people appreciate just the disruption that we came out of, and Boeing again coming out of that further disruption, self-inflicted. Agreed on the MAX grounding. But these are the types of things you would see. And in fact, quality issues are not limited to Boeing, right? This is a challenge across the entire industry. So here we say, I'm going to say the same thing I probably said last year, which is, look, it's still not existential to Boeing, and it will slowly improve from here. Now, I would have been wrong last year. I probably did say that, and I would have been wrong. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think just adding to what Courtney said. I mean, one, Boeing, it's a very big industrial organization and complex, right? So changes at Boeing are forthcoming, but candidly, they just take time. It is a very big proverbial ship, right, to turn. And I think the early moves by Kelly since he's become CEO and what he's kind of outlined, they seem to be the right moves. You know, it's really focusing on the core of the business, selling off non-core businesses, right-sizing the business to really ramp up production on aircraft. And ultimately, that's the key, right, is to get the deliveries up and to get the aircraft delivered to the airlines. That's, at least on the commercial side, that's what's going to move the needle for them. You know, I think on the culture side and so forth, that's going to be something that, truthfully, they have to address, and it will take some time. But I think, you know, for Kelly, for his management team, setting these goals and setting this vision at a high level and letting the business execute on it, it's going to be really important. And so I'm hopeful that 2025 will be a good year for Boeing and the team, and that, you know, he's set out a vision and a path that's going to be executable.
I'll offer a slight adjustment to that. My hope is that 2025 will just be a quiet year for Boeing.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing happened. That's what somebody asked me. What does Boeing need to do? Nothing. Like, just have nothing happen for a while. Just head down, do your stuff, and which we said last year. And then, of course, you know, there was a spontaneous emergency exit, I think we could call it. So that's what they need, just time.
Yeah. And I've had the privilege of seeing Kelly's leadership style firsthand when I was back at Pratt & Whitney, right? I was in a couple of meetings, and really him being selected just was sort of a breath of fresh air to some extent. And you can kind of see, to Brian's point, you can see the moves he's made, and they seem like the step in the right direction. So one of my questions here was, what is the next milestone that Boeing is going to be measured against, right? Is it the 787 delivery rate? Is it what's happening with the 777 next? Is it, you know, how many MAXs are grounded at the end of 2025? What's that next yardstick that we need to look at?
From whose perspective, the public's or the airlines or the employees?
Maybe both, maybe all three, maybe there's different yardsticks as well, right?
Yeah, I think delivery rates for the airlines, right? And that comes with the assumption of delivering airplanes with all 4 bolts in each of the door plugs and no quality issues. And that's just kind of the given, but getting those delivery rates back to a point. And look, I mean, there are now real signs that Boeing missed the shortage by the time they get their rates back. On the MAX, you know, they still have, as far as I'm aware, as of December 20th, they still have the 38 aircraft a month production limit by the FAA. That has not been addressed. You have the 787 production. We're seeing far more demand and room in the wide body, just kind of in that overall market today than we are on the narrow body. They're both fine. Don't start selling the airplanes just yet. But I mean, for the airlines, it's, you know, get me the airplanes that I needed. For the public, I'm going to go back to I don't want to hear about you in the news at all. Like, and by the way, the public, we are the most fickle. Like our attention span is negative. So, for instance, we're talking about United Healthcare today. And Boeing just kind of left the spotlight. So just time. Something else will fill it for the public, and probably the same thing for the employees, right? Look, it's one thing to deal with the challenges of the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, going through the MAX crashes themselves. I mean, that's just a terrible thing to do, or a terrible place to be from an employee standpoint. And that's not even considering all the other perspectives, including family members and the people, of course, right? But from employees, that's tough. And then you go through the pandemic and the uncertainty around that, and then a strike, and you just need a reason to go to work and be able to kind of lift your head up again and be like, yeah, I work here and I'm proud, and not expect that somebody's going to come back and be like, oh, that's crazy.
And it seems cultures can change, right? You even look in our aviation industry at how many times airlines can go through a point where you feel like culturally they can't survive, and then they do a turnaround. And look at United.
And then Lufthansa buys
over its history and others. So
yeah. Sometimes no news is the best news.
Yes.
All right. Well, they're not the only OEM. There's another little one over on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean that's doing pretty well. So maybe we could talk a little bit about them, the Airbus. And they've certified, and the A321XLR is flying, and they're doing a lot of R&D and other activities. So what are your thoughts with Airbus?
Look, they have their own challenges. Getting airplanes out the door. A lot of those, this has been undercovered probably. And I'm sure Airbus would be the first to remind people of this, but a lot of the delivery challenges and supply chain challenges they're having today actually were because of the Boeing strike, right? Because it affects all sorts of suppliers down the chain. A lot of those suppliers are also suppliers for Airbus. Specifically, I'm thinking of like seats. But look, the Airbus sales motto over the last 4 years has been the exact same sales motto that GE has, which is, at least we're not them, right? And it works, right? I mean, the same thing, right? Just make sure that somebody else is having challenges, and there are no serious problems at Airbus. They're doing their thing. The XLR has finally certified. I say finally, but I mean it's kind of within the normal realm of aircraft certification delays. There were some challenges. The engineers dealt with them. Here we are. They continue to work on, like you said, engineering projects for 50 freighter. There are talks of some other projects and some other programs down the line. I think we're definitely going to see a slowing down in general in the industry of new technology and new products, for better or for worse. Airbus could potentially be the exception to that, depending on how aggressive they want to be. But remember that Airbus and Boeing are Batman and Joker. They hate each other, but they cannot live without one another. I'm not going to say which one's which. But the last thing Airbus wants is Boeing not being there, and the last thing Boeing wants is Airbus not being there. They do need a duopoly is a very, very powerful thing. Monopolies won't sustain. So, I mean, more of the same from Airbus, which increase production rates. They keep revising down for, I would call them, industry reasons, where Boeing has more kind of internal reasons for that.
Yeah, I think just to add on the Airbus note, one, for the listeners or viewers that haven't read it, Courtney put out a really interesting report a few weeks ago now, I think, on the A321XLR, and just just the market demand and size for that aircraft. As you said, Peter, the plane's delivering. I think Aer Lingus just took delivery of 2 on the same day, which is pretty interesting. And we've already seen Aer Lingus operator announce new routes with the type. Going to Indianapolis comes to mind. I think they're going to use it to Minneapolis even. Iberia just started flights from Madrid to Boston. So, it'll be really interesting transatlantic airplane where airlines decide to use them. Also, similarly in South America, are there thinner markets that previously with wide-body aircraft didn't make sense, but now makes sense from an economic perspective with a narrow body where you can get some element of a premium cabin in there mixed in, but have the benefits of a narrow-body airplane. So it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves and how that compares to the success of the 757 and what the 757 was for back in the day, the likes of Continental initially, but Delta, United now, American, even TWA at one point used them all transatlantic. Northwest too, before the merger as well.
Should do a quick round of predictions to see what's our biggest, like, what do we think is going to happen in 2025, and what are the big ticket items that we feel are going to materialize. Courtney, you want to start?
Oh, I got to make my predictions first. Okay. I think one of the big trends for 2025 are going to be low fuel prices. Even though they have not been high, and what that all means for sustainability. I think my prediction is that 2025 is going to be a challenging year for sustainability, but that will only increase the discussion, right? The volume of discussion on it, like the frustration in progress that will be driven by lower fuel prices and the economic incentive to do that. I think I'm already noticing a shift in that, and it may just be one of the things that we have to go through to get to where we are, but it feels like we're entering that type of period.
All right,
fuel surcharges increase at the same time as fuel prices go down in 2025?
Yeah, well, by the airlines, you mean like on like a yeah. Well, yeah, like Air Canada was always the best at that. Like, wait a minute, the price of oil went down and fuel surcharge. How does? And by the way, it all adds up to like the same fare because they have to compete on that. Yeah, I see what you're doing there.
Let me hop in real quick and just also want to give a shout out to my friends Rob Morris at Cirium, Stu Hatcher, and Jack Ambrose at IBA. Both of them, although they're separate, they've done some really interesting webinars. Cirium put one out last week, and both of them have some fleet forecasts and so forth. I think the one thing Courtney talked about, fuel. I think if you looked at non-fuel costs, right, they are increasing, and inflationary pressures are definitely there. I think some of that will reduce and come under control. Airline financial performance has been strong. It's has it more or less plateaued or stabilized? It's still early in the cycle to say, and it's definitely better than where we were at in 2019 pre-COVID, but it's probably not as strong as it was than 2023. I think more broadly, though, it's a little bit like what Courtney said about Boeing, which is just like no news. It feels, absent something geopolitical or an external shock or something, that in a lot of ways it might be much of the same. The macro themes are there and constant. And so if you look out at the horizon, I don't know that changes all that much over the years. Now, that being said, in the same breath, this is the airline industry. It is, extremely volatile and definitely, it will change if there's an economic shock, if geopolitical issues come into play, if, things on the cargo side with tariffs come into play, all of that could have a very near-term impact.
Yeah, great points, and I can definitely chime in on Courtney's point where being in the sustainable fuel industry, it's all about the premium above the jet fuel, right? That you and now suddenly the cost of jet fuel itself is lower, and so the premiums are higher, right? So these barriers just keep getting slightly more difficult to kind of overcome. But anyway, I think I kind of agree that the next few years in general would be slower from a sustainability perspective, and then we'll start to see some real good traction. We'll still make progress though, I think, right, in general. And I think my big prediction for 2025 is the likes of Archer Aerospace and Joby making some really big moves, right? Bigger deals signed, more testing done, and we might actually see some really big splashes by them. I feel, and that market is very untapped, and they have some really good products, right? So I think that's my prediction for 2025, which is fairly unconventional, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think if I think back, Ashwin, to Rob Morris's webinar in Ethereum, he made the point of it, like the industry isn't necessarily short of aircraft; it's short of new aircraft, right? And aircraft that have been in storage that are returning to service helps mitigate that. If OEMs can ramp up production, that can mitigate that. I mean, a little bit on your theme of some of the EV tolls, being able to sign up customers and kind of grow that way. I wonder also, will we see an order by Embraer for the E2 as that airplane goes into more of mainline service? I think in the U.S. market, it's often associated with the E1 operating regional aircraft or regional service on behalf of legacy carriers, but the reality is the E2 is really not a regional aircraft. It's more of a narrow body airplane the size of an A319 and the 737-700. And so will you see airlines that want that near-term narrow body capacity step up in order of that? Because that's, if you look at OEM backlogs, you're definitely going to get earlier availability from Embraer relative to Boeing or Airbus at this stage.
And you're already hearing, well, we have been hearing for a while about signs that particularly on the narrow body side, that the aircraft shortage is resolving. I don't want to say ending, but resolving. And I mean, originally, one of the things we were looking at last summer, you started to see things like deferrals, JetBlue, Spirit, right? These, granted, in a unique U.S. market, but it's the aircraft retirement. So this is the big trend that has been happening that now has suddenly caught up. Actually, it's just something that I published last week. But listen, Cirium's talking about it. IBA's talking about it. George Ferguson from Bloomberg just put out a good piece on the idea of, look, this is what happens. Airlines, and this is the way I explain it from the narrow body shortage perspective, and Rob Morris is absolutely right. We're short new airplanes. We're not short. We're still a little under on overall airplanes, but we have the GTF fleet coming back. We have production that will continue to ramp up, but most importantly and massively is any airline that found itself without production deliveries over the last 2.5 years have extended leases or stopped retiring aircraft. Aircraft are getting older. The value is now in older tech. We are in a very distinct moment in time where it costs operators more, by comments directly from the operators. It costs them more to operate new tech airplanes than it does the airplanes they were supposed to replace. Now, that won't continue off in the future as reliability and issues improve, but even with the fuel burn benefits, right? The increase in maintenance costs and the downtime and all the extra and the price of the aircraft are creating an upside down incentive, and then have been for a while. So that needs to work itself out. airplanes are getting older. That puts more strain on the MRO space. That puts more value in engines, and that puts even more value in the blades and life limited parts inside the engine. So we're seeing this shift away from production. This is why I said Boeing may have missed the shortage. We're seeing that shift away from production for the airlines into the idea of, oh, well, I can fly that a little bit longer. Okay. I mean, how many airplanes were retired simply because the new one was coming and they had to make room for it? And we kind of got into that cycle. And airlines will do what they need to do. They are adapting, and they've had 2.5 years to do so. And you can do a lot of things in 2.5 years. 2025, it's already happening, but 2025 will be an increased level of admission that, whoa, we have enough airplanes all of a sudden. We have enough capacity all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in terms of the extensions, I think Courtney's absolutely right. And you're seeing it more and more on the wide body side play out in particular. There's a lot of discussion on the narrow bodies, but I think you can't ignore what's happened with the 777s, A330s, right? A lot of airlines that have those airplanes have just extended them out. And just to circle back a little bit on the narrow body side, if you look at and reference this IBA report, and again, hat tip to Stu Hatcher on this, I think it's greater. They're predicting in their forecast, I think it's like greater than 3/4 of aircraft that are going to be delivered are going to be next year are going to be in that 150 to 250 seat segment. So really that narrow body segment, right? So on the wide body side, if that's your baseline and you've got the E2 and you've got ATR and you've got wide bodies kind of mixed into that remaining component, if you have wide bodies in your fleet, you are probably extending them out for passenger service as a result. I do want to say,
I'm personally disappointed in the conservativism of your predictions for 2025. All of you are just doing the easy. My prediction for 2025 is that Air Koryo is going to have a big order for MC-21s to boost that program, perhaps some SSJs mixed in, and it's going to make news. That's my prediction.
You're always on the leading edge, Peter.
Yeah.
On the predictions, I do want to say, I've referenced a couple of data providers here. I know Courtney and his partner Garrick. They haven't done a webinar, but there is a big aviation conference in January. I know they're going to be attending. So if your listeners are there, and if they haven't already booked some time with them, or I'm told even Courtney does photos on the sidewalk. He's a celebrity in Dublin now.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so now he got it.
Podcast, guys.
Now he got it. Definitely reach out to them to book some time. Mark Streeter, also a friend of ours, who's the credit analyst covering airlines and aviation at JP Morgan, and Jamie Baker, JP Morgan's U.S. airline equity analyst, did a webinar. I'm not sure that it's out there in the public domain, but it was really interesting, just talking about the year. They published some excellent materials, and Courtney and Garrick were mentioned in that as well. They provide some really interesting slides and context covering both the airline side and the leasing side. And finally, I know Courtney doesn't talk about it all that much. Visualapproach.io. If you do not get his weekly newsletter, you absolutely should. And if you see him in Dublin, ask for a photo.
Listen, my prediction for 2025, I hang out with Brian more often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's get that recorded.
Yeah.
You guys are great, and Rob and Delphine and the Cerium team have been helpful in this, as has Stu and Jack at IPA.
Nice. Cool. So let's.
We'll be having them back to see if they're right on their 2025 prediction.
Yeah, we can invite them. Yeah,
The fun thing here is we can do the same thing at the end of next year and then see how close we got to our predictions and get more experts in if we need to. Yeah.
You guys are our engines on our Aeropedia logo now. We've added you.
I would just like to point out who's number one.
Moving right along. Aircraft equipment. Can you identify the purpose of the bulbous equipment seen here on some of the 737 Classic wingtips? It was an option.
Is that a logo light?
It is.
Yeah.
You got
Suck it, Rynott. Got one.
That's it. Good man.
L1011
All
that.
right. We're going to do a round robin with our trivia round. So I was first, but I'm not doing all the questions this time. So who wants to go next?
I'll go. I've got a quick one. An aircraft had a very specific type of flap. It was called a Cooper flap. What was it, and what did it do?
Now, you say this. Is this a modern
It is modern to
aircraft,
me.
Courtney? Yeah, well.
I think it was also called the Cooper lock. It was used tongue in cheek.
Does the aircraft still fly today?
Somewhere.
Somewhere. Okay.
This is a type. This is not like a tail number.
All right.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'm going to go out on a limb. You said Cooper flap.
Yeah, or Cooper lock.
So this is DB or Cooper lock, DB Cooper.
You are correct.
So does it like lock the air stairs on the
That's
727?
exactly what it does. They put a literal flap that was in the wind stream that when you got enough airspeed, the wind pushed it and it locked the door. It physically moved a chunk of metal across the aft air stairs so that there was no control. You couldn't override it. It was aerodynamically driven, and it prevented people from parachuting out of the back.
Oh my God. And this was as a result of the DB Cooper incident?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I didn't know that's what they called it. It was Cooper Flap is the name.
Yeah, I don't think that was the official name. That's just kind of what people called it.
What people called it. Yeah.
Wow.
Very good. That was a good one.
All right.
Did you hear that? That counts
All
as
right.
2.
So go back in history, gents. I'll throw one out there. Not a graphic for you, but this airline, which airline is what I'm going to ask, operated a transatlantic joint venture with United Airlines for service between Washington, D.C. and Madrid. What type of aircraft was used, and where were the crews based? Should we have like the Jeopardy music on this?
What year was this?
Oh, Aer Lingus
Yeah, that's right. Aer Lingus.
with 7 fives.
It was an A330-200.
Oh.
It was 2010 maybe, or 2009, 2010, I think, and it ended in 2012 as a result of, I think, the pilot contract negotiation at the time. So they used an Irish registered A330-200 based at Dulles. It flew to Madrid. It had Irish pilots and that were based in Washington, D.C. and U.S. based flight attendants.
Wow.
Wow.
It was like a white label service. So Aer Lingus provided the crew, the operation. United did the marketing. And Courtney and Garrick on their podcast had Jochen Schnott, Jock. Jock ran that operation for Aer Lingus.
Oh, very cool.
That was a great one.
Yeah.
Plus, I like it because I knew the part of the answer.
Okay, I'll go next. So as of right now, which is the longest route in the world, flown by which airline, and what aircraft do they use?
Is it Perth to
Singapore
London?
Airlines A350 from Singapore to Newark.
No.
Perth to London on the 78. 9. The
No, I mean, Brian's very right
It's-
in many ways,
Yes,
but there's one
he
minor.
said Newark. It's the JFK one,
Oh,
a little bit
JFK.
further than the Newark
Okay.
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because and I checked this. Apparently, the JFK route is 5 minutes more than the Newark route, right? So
Well-
that officially is.
I mean, if you're going to New Jersey, it's the least we can give you.
Yeah, pretty much.
A little extra time. You're going to need
Drones.
it.
With
Yeah.
the diversion for drones, though,
Yeah.
maybe the Newark flight's longer now.
Mhm. Thanks for being with us, and
you.
this has been fun, and we should do it next year.
Cheers. Talk to you guys in 25. And I better talk to you before that, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Bye,
cheers.
Court.
Bye for a year. Thanks for joining us this week. Send us any feedback, trivia ideas, or future topics you may have to our email at aeropedia.podcast@gmail.com. See you on the next leg of our journey.
Bye for now.
Departure Ready Heavy, contact departure 119.2, good night.
49.3, speed at 290 heavy.